starting? Is it recording? It's starting. Oh, there it go. Okay.
There it goes.
All right. Welcome back to the Comic Book Savant. I'm your host, James Harris. This episode, we have Heath Holland, my fellow Spinnerack bro. And this week, we're going to be talking about, is it too much comic book entertainment in the industry right now? How you doing, Heath?
Hi, James. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. This is your first YouTube video in a while. It's an honor for me to be here talking about too many comic books and let's start it again. I was trying to be funny and I just
Because
lost
now
it
you're
completely.
free. Now, what is going on? Now it's freeze. Do you see it? It is like you were totally frozen.
No.
Okay, now you okay. It took it that long, and now you went frozen. I'll have to edit
Yeah,
it later
better
because I
Skype.
don't know how. Yeah, so I don't know how that's going to even play out. Whatever. We start over.
Start over.
One,
Yeah.
2, 3. Welcome back to the Comic Book Savant. I'm your host James Harris. On this episode, we have my fellow Spinnerack bro Heath. How you doing, Heath?
I'm doing good, James. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing good. This week, we wanted to talk about how much comic book entertainment is out in the industry right now. And I guess, is it a good or a bad thing? So I guess let's kind of jump into it from your perspective. I know for me, it's been kind of crazy, but for you, how do you feel about the amount, not just TV, but in general across the board? Because there's so much content that's coming out right now.
There's a lot of content coming out, and it's hard to keep up with. I remember having a conversation, I don't know, it was maybe 5 years ago, maybe longer than that. It was probably around 2014. And the conversation that I was having with someone was that there was like, are there too many comic book movies? And of course, this was well before we ended up where we're at with Marvel and with DC and everything. And the answer was like, no, there's room for everything. But now, all these years later, it's a weird thing to say. I think there's too much comic book stuff because if you look at the movies, you've got multiple multi-million dollar blockbusters every single year, or they hope they're blockbusters. But I mean, they're just cranking this stuff out left and right, and they've kind of overtaken other kinds of movies too. Which that's the problem is if we could have comic book, if we could have our what was the one with Vin Diesel based on the Valiant comic? Which one did he do? Was it Bloodshot?
Bloodshot.
Yeah.
I think it is. Yeah.
If we could have Bloodshot and have like a $50 million crime movie or something like that, that'd be great. But we don't get that. Everybody just wants to go make comic book movies. And with the comics, the actual comic books, like I've been reading comic books for oh geez, 35, I don't know, like like decades and decades.
Yeah.
And I've never had such a problem just keeping up with stuff. I mean, yeah, like how many different Spider-Man titles every single month? How many different X-Men titles every single month? Like, oh, you like the X-Men? Well, here's a new book where it's the X-Men from the 60s and they're now in the present day. It's like, well, there's so much, and I think part of it, we can get into this, but I think part of it is because we're living in the era now of the corporation as a service where everyone wants to have these libraries. It's not necessarily about the individual thing, it's the library itself and what power that holds as a draw to so if the streaming service or to Marvel Unlimited or to DC Infinite Universe or to if on the TV side of things if you want to have like the HBO Max or Disney Plus, it's
Plus, yeah.
content. You know what I mean? What do
Yeah.
you think about that?
Yeah, and it's definitely, and they are using it to. I think they're getting away from the essence of the source material, and it's like you said, it's fuel for the corporation to fill these other niches to bring more money into the corporation. And its quality is lacking across certain things. Certain things you still get high quality on, but then other times I feel like it's just cannon fodder, like you said, that they can then spin this new comic out to a new series on their new service and to hope it catches on, or even if it doesn't, we can still now it's something new that we can still spin out into a show or to a cartoon or to a video game or to something that's going to recoup our return on investment. and this is really more so of a bottom line. Uh, I feel like than being caretakers of the content that all of this inspired to begin with. I know for me being, primary, because you're more open spectrum, but you do cover comics. Where for me, I'm this totally comic industry cover it. It's so hard between movies, cartoons, the comic books themselves, and it's like it's what I do, it's what I cover. But I mean, we have a thing where at one point when Marvel Studios started, we got one, maybe two movies a year. I mean, now I was just looking, and it's I think just between now and the end of the year, I think it's like six Marvel movies left to come out with Black Widow starting the train, and then it's what Black Widow, Shang-Chi, Eternals, um, what's the other one? There's another one in there. Oh, Spider-Man, No Way Home. So it's five or six more between now and December. Is kind of crazy, and that's a lot. We normally would get, like I said, 2 to 2, and it's just increasing. And because of the pandemic, films were pushed back, pushed back, pushed back. So now it's a stockpile with more that have been, since things have gotten better in different parts of the world, those movies went into production. So those are lining up. So we're gonna have a constant heavy flow of content coming between now and what, till at least 2023 for the most part. Like Marvel stuff, a lot of Marvel stuff is done. I just saw an article, Love and Thunder just finished principal shooting. So then now that's, so yeah, it's so much. And we're not even going to talk about the Disney Plus shows that are all been announced in their different forms of production. Two or three others of those shows that haven't even been announced with release dates are done shooting now. With the next set, there's a constant, a constant production loop going. Like they're pumping this stuff out, and we're going to be getting it right on top of one another. So it is overwhelming, and it's like I hope that the quality meets expectations and that it doesn't falter because so much of it is being thrown at us. Because it's definitely hard to remotely keep up with it all at this point.
Let me ask you a question, because when we grew up, and this is where this conversation is hard to have without the in my day.
Yeah.
But when we were coming into comics, we can leave the movies aside because we didn't really have those. I mean, you'd have like the Superman movies.
We dreamed of this. We never imagined this. We would ever have this problem. So we didn't even never thought this would ever exist.
Like, remember Wizard Magazine would do like dreamcasting things, and they'd be like, we'll have Patrick Stewart as Professor Xavier, and then it really happened, and we were like, what a fantasy world we're living in. But when so let's just stick to comics. You had Peter Parker as Spider-Man, and you had Tony Stark as, you had, very like one version of a character. So on one hand, I think it's actually really cool the way things are right now, because you have Miles Morales, if you want to read that, you have Peter Parker, you have 2099 Spider-Man, you have, and then with, you have Ironheart, you have all these different versions, and you can kind of pick, not everything is for, not everything is for everybody. And so they've kind of covered their bases by making, we'll just put out a ton of diversity and you can pick what feels right for you. That's really cool on one hand. But on the other hand, if you're trying to cover the industry or just know what's going on in the universe, as we used to could do with 20 books a month, maybe you knew everything that was happening in the Marvel or DC universe. Now I feel like that's really, I don't know that it's impossible, but I think it's close to it.
I would probably say it's probably pretty close to impossible. I mean, I know because of the pandemic, they've slowed down the production of certain books, but I know at one point it was each publisher, but especially between the big two, were putting out almost 100 books a month each, and we're not talking about the Images, the Valiants, the Booms, the Devils Do. Those are other still independent publishers that put out good books as well. We're just talking about, let's say, close to 200 books a month from the two biggest publishers in the game, not to think of everybody else. So, you know what I mean? that's a heavy hand, you know, to say the
Yeah.
least. Um, yeah, so I totally agree on that. I don't know what it means for the industry moving forward and for the fans moving forward. I'm not fatigued with it, but I mean, I guess as a content creator, is how to use my time most wisely. I have to kind of pick and choose my battles on how I cover, certain content when it comes, because having a balance, because I do cover the comic book industry. I don't want to only just be reviewing movies. I don't only just want to be reviewing TV shows. I still am a fan of comics and reading comics. So I like to still do that. But so much of my time is trying to, like I'm still, doing content on Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And as we're recording this morning, Loki episode 1 is hitting out, and I'm not even done with getting all my content done for Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now Loki is going in. Then we have in a month that will either be finished or almost finishing. Then we have Black Widow, coming out, and then whatever the next Disney Plus show, get to come out, and that's not talking about the. I don't know when Boys season 3. I know that's kind of in the can. They're starting to show photos of what's going to come in the third season. I haven't even covered the second season yet. You know what I mean? And the
Yeah.
third season is on the horizon. So it is a minefield. You gotta have to maneuver and navigate through just what's best for you. To me, to the community here, to cover it the best way possible and figuring out the best way to do it and the most effective way to do it.
Well,
It's
and
definitely
here's something else to think about, and this can be a good note to maybe go out on, is that when you get to a certain level of market saturation, saturation always comes before the end of a trend. I mean, saturation is what kills that market. And I don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow, but I really felt like the end of the whole Marvel Phase 3 thing when we got, the Avengers two-parter. Um, I felt like that was a really great place for Marvel, for Disney to kind of step back and be like, let's let this cool off a little bit and let people miss it so that they can come back hungry for it whenever we decide. But they didn't do that. They immediately launched into the TV aspect of things. Really, I mean, they took a little bit of a break, but this I mean, like in a long-term trend, if you look at like the westerns, like the 50s for the westerns, total saturation, and then you dry up a market. You look at a certain kind of horror movie in the 70s or whatever. Anytime you have this huge trend, the action movies of the 80s and the early 90s, the stuff that we love, the Van Damme, the Stallone, the Schwarzenegger, market saturation, and then it goes away because people just get tired of it. Now, with comics, it's different because you have different genres and you have different styles that you can approach it with. But I can't imagine that this isn't leading to some sort of a cooling off period at which point
yeah
people just get kind of tired of
a
all of it.
market crash. I think it's bound to happen. I think the only thing that kind of will help Marvel in the long run is the pandemic slowed down the train. So
Yeah.
I know for me, when even though it was a unique show, and I know you haven't watched it, but WandaVision, like at a point in WandaVision where it kind of crossed reality, and I got the first taste of the MCU when they touched on stuff from the movies, I was like, I did not realize how much I missed it till that moment. And I was like, I think now that is a good thing. I think it's a really good thing. And I think the other thing that helps Marvel in a way too, with the television shows and stuff like that, and that Feige has control over it all. He knows, like, okay, I have to change if I don't want this to burn out. And now he's just like, y'all trust me, I'm going for it. And where each different show and each that he's getting bolder in choices and and things that he's doing. And I've heard him say in interviews he's regretted certain decisions he's made in the past about, like, he was talking about Tilda Swinton and Doctor Strange, watching that character, and like, if he had it to do again with what he knows now, he would have stood on his beliefs and did the right thing. So he's not making that mistake now. So he's being bolder, and he's he's earned that trust from us as fans, and Disney trusts him because he's making them a buttload of money to be like, long as it's respectful, but kind of some of the directions with the shows and the content and where he's targeting it, he's trying to grow it up accordingly. So hopefully it stays relevant and it doesn't get stale. But time, like you said, time will tell because they've made so much money. They set the market trend, and we're seeing where DC failed when they try to copy them instead of doing their own thing. And different studios are trying to copy the blueprint that Disney has, and everybody can't do what they do. They don't have the same people working for them. So I think they might be able to sustain, but all these other people that are trying to copy them, and we've seen different, not just in the comic book genre, but we saw Universal with their monster universe. And, you got to have the right people and the right things to set it up. So I think, on a closing note that, like you said, it is going to be a cooling off period. And I think they might be the only game in town and everybody's going to be like, okay, we can't do what they do. We give up, and, or just be more creative. You can do something similar, but let it happen a little bit more organic. Don't push. They want to get to where Marvel is, but it took Marvel a while to get there. So I definitely feel the cooling coming. Winter is coming, as as we like to say. Winter is definitely coming for this. I think you're totally right on that. What are your closing remarks on the topic before we get out of here for this episode?
I think we're living through really interesting times, and I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before. We're living through the rise of the corporations who we've never seen so much owned by so few. And you look at like DC Comics, not in great shape right now. Marvel Comics, I don't know. I mean, they've got all that Disney support behind them. There's money in the company, but how much longer is Disney going to use the comics as a proving ground to discover new ideas for movies until they just like, well, we don't, how many people are reading comics on a monthly basis? Not that many. And how many are watching the movies and the shows? So I don't know what the next 3 to 5 years holds for the industry at large, but I do see a saturation point, and I think we're living through some really interesting historic times. And I don't know that they're ever going to go away. Like, I don't know that DC Comics is ever going to go away, but the industry as we've known it and enjoyed it for most of our lives, I think it's changing. And for me, it doesn't feel great, but I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like that, we've seen things, and I've done, episodes where I talked about the graphic novel industry and how that's booming, but the single comics are faltering. It's a real thing. So I definitely feel what you're saying on that aspect, that we are, and it's going to be, very interesting, especially DC being the forefront of that. Just everything that's going on with Warner Brothers just across the board. Their announcement of them splitting off and selling off parts, and the Discovery merger situation, them spinning that out. Yeah, I'm kind of nervous for, that's, they've been one of the big two for a long time. And, in 5 years, will it still be here? Or in the way that we've grown to know it our whole lives? It might not, and so it is a scary thing because it's, like you said, we both spent most of our lives following it in the form that we know it now. So if it changes and how it changes will be interesting to watch.
Let me ask you one more question. Do you remember?
Okay.
And it was when Joe Quesada took over Marvel as the editor in chief back in 2000, 2001, something like that. It was around the millennium.
Yeah.
And his strategy was to just strip everything down. And there was one Spider-Man title, and there were like 2 X-Men titles. And his whole goal was, I want you to be able to follow this universe. And I think it ended up being like 20 books a month. I mean, you had Punisher, you had the darker, like the Max stuff or whatever, but it was really stripped down.
Marvel Knights. They had the
Yes.
Marvel Knights. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. Yep.
I look back on those times as some of the best times for comics because it felt approachable and new people were getting into it. And I just wonder, as cool as it is to have so many different titles, just sticking with Marvel, to have all these different, to have, I mean, it's a lot. It's at least 10, 15 books every single week. Probably it's more than that, really. But
Mhm.
is the solution moving forward to just to do that something like that again? Is it? Go ahead.
I think so, but I think they're too scared to because they're making too much money because people are still because you have diehard Spider-Man fans that will buy every Spider-Man book. You have diehard X-Men fans that will buy every X-Men book. I've just gotten to the point where I only buy stuff when it's on sale and I buy my stuff digitally. And a lot of times I don't read it till months, sometimes years later, because I have such a back pile because it's one event after another. It's one new book after another. It's no way that you would drive yourself crazy. And I was doing that at a point, trying to keep up with everything that was currently out. I was forcing myself to read stuff and I was like, no, I'm going to do what I enjoy when I enjoy it and not let the industry dictate to me what I cover. I'm going to cover what I'm passionate about in that moment. And that's the lesson I had to learn from for myself. But I think that was a simpler and easier time. And I think, even if they did something where I know people have talked about doing like what are they called? Uh Monthly like digest anthologies of like maybe have a Spider-Man anthology, maybe have an X-Men anthology, and just have it all collected in one thing, the different stories and the different books, but and you get that one book monthly, that one collection monthly. And if you follow X-Men, you buy that. Even if it was per se $20, if you're getting the equivalent of those same individual, comics in that one digest, I think people will be willing to pay it if I get all my X-Men in this book every month and I don't got to get anything else. And I could just follow that world, that story. Cool. Maybe they would do better. But again, when you're charging $3 to $4.99 an issue and people are buying it, you know,
Yeah.
it's money, so it's like we don't have to print nearly as many comics as we did in the 80s and 90s to make a lot more money, at the same time.
Well, that's interesting because that's what I think we've seen is that in the 80s and 90s you had a wide base of readership and they were supporting the amount of titles that were coming out. It was fewer titles, more readers. And now you have less readers, more titles. And so they're building this huge library off the backs of I think the smallest audience that there's ever been for comic books.
Yeah,
So
they're charging them a premium, a high premium for it, where a lot of times we find the quality does not meet the price. And I don't think I
yep.
necessarily mind paying a higher premium if when I open up that book and read it, it meets my expectations on the quality level.
Yeah.
Um, with both of the big two companies, I more time. I'm not gonna say more time than not, but it's bordering like 60-40 that it could be less quality than what I'm paying for it, which is not good. It should be going in the other direction, even higher, even, that the quality is meeting the expectations of the premium, but it's, it's what we have at this point. So it's something that you said that resonates, and I reference it a lot, is that you have to vote with your wallet. So, for me, I if it's gonna be a crapshoot, a dice game for something I get, I'll get it on sale. You know what I mean? So I don't feel
Yeah.
nearly as bad, paying $5 for a $10-$20 trade to read a story that I could be like afterwards. It's like, oh, I could have did without it. I would have been a lot more, a lot angrier at $20 than $5, or
Yeah.
$2, you know, for
Yeah.
sure. So I think that's a good place for us to end on this because we don't want to keep it too long. I know it's been a while since I've done video, and I had my spinner rack bro on with me. Stay tuned. We have more videos coming for you guys. Where can they find you, Heath? Because you're here in the YouTube space. So where can they find you and all your content?
You know what? Head to serialatmidnight.com and everything launches from Serial. You can find everything else that you would possibly want to know about Serial at Midnight at serialatmidnight.com.
It's a great site. It's a great YouTube channel. We've done collab videos before. This is the first time you'll really be seeing it on my channel. We're going to be doing more in the future. We're going to be doing more video. You probably will be surprised to see this video because it's been so long since I've actually did video content, but more is coming. So be on the lookout. And as always, you can find me here on the YouTube channel. And similar for me, anything Comic Book Savant, you can find over at comicbooksavant.com. So that's all we have for you guys for this episode. Thank you again, Heath. And guys, you stay safe, and we both will be seeing you soon. Take care.